tell you how long I've looked forward to this dialogue. Almost since its inception, and we've been doing them for 6 years. I have a very special relationship with Rabbi Ted. Not only do I hold him in the highest esteem, I also couldn't think of anybody that it would be better to be the person that was involved in my wedding with Alina. So Rabbi Ted married us at the Whitby Institute 3 years ago, and that was a huge
I actually
honor.
conducted the ceremony.
Yes.
I didn't marry them.
Thank you. So, to have him here, given his busy schedule, traveling with the Amigos and doing all the work that you're doing, is an honor to have him here. A little history, just so you have some idea. I took some notes. I don't think that the history is the most important, but he was ordained in 1968 at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute. He worked in LA as a congregational rabbi and as a campus rabbi. In 1975, somehow he found the time to have a PhD in professional psychology with a focus on the mystical and the meditative. And from that created really so much of what's happening as far as meditative Jewish theology and its current formation. He works with the Three Amigos, which is a combination of a pastor, an imam, and is really walks what I hope to be exemplary of collaboration between disparate religions and philosophies. He's the author of Judaism for Dummies, in case you don't know, and A Journey of Awakening. And it really is my great joy, pleasure to introduce Rabbi Ted Falcon. Thank you. So this is totally unscripted. I have no prepared questions, and really...
I have notes, however.
Do you have notes?
Yeah, they're inside my kippah. People wonder why I wear this when I work. Yeah, because I keep the notes up there. Read them with my crown chakra. You know, it's all a matter of being prepared.
So are they written in a circle?
Stitched around on the inside. So tonight I gave Ted really the opening to what he wanted to talk about, and it was really fortunate, the topic, because it's on the transcendence of the Kabbalah, and it's really a subject that I would like to know a lot more of. So really, these dialogues are as much for you as they are for me. And it's how I learn and how I find out more. So we're going to learn a bit about the Kabbalah tonight and how to bring that into our daily lives, I hope. No? So let's start off with this. It's been spoken that the Kabbalah was really the territory for very special, highly learned Jewish scholars for so long. Is that no longer true? Has it changed? Is it just that you're a radical?
I wrecked that tradition.
You did.
Can I stand up?
The worst?
The truth is, the greatest of the Kabbalistic teachers didn't even live to 40. So the 40 was not meant to be an age. It was meant to encourage people who wanted to go into meditative and mystical realms to have a firm grounding in their regular life. So that some of the things that could happen in deeper meditative states or in exploring the mystical realms wouldn't disorient them too much. There's a story in the Talmud of 4 who entered Pardes, which is a whole other story, but 4 who entered the mystical realms with Rabbi Akiva. Akiva was the only one who went in b'shalom and came out, went in with peace and came out with peace. One of the other guys died, which you don't know exactly what that means. Like, did he leave his body and he decided not to come back? Another one of them, it says, went crazy. Again, you don't know what that means. was he confusing realms? And another one of them apostated, converted to another religion, and he got called, he's still a teacher, so people still follow his teachings, but his name is not used. They call him Acher, they call him the other. So it's just interesting how it handled, but there's a recognition that one could become disoriented in altered states of consciousness. But I don't think the 40 had to do with age. So that's it.
Why don't we start
Well, it's
off?
good to go out on one that I knew the answer to.
How about for those that know nothing about the Kabbalah, other than perhaps?
They're the best kind, because whatever I say, you have no way of knowing. This is like when I talk about Hebrew to a group that has no acquaintance at all. On the one hand, it terrifies me, because if I say something that is incorrect, who knows how far that's going to go. But the other way, oh, that's what it means, that's what it must mean. So you're going to ask?
I forget.
Okay.
No, what?
He's going to ask.
I'm already mystified and a little
You're going to ask,
disoriented.
like, what is the Kabbalah?
Yeah, like a really easy one for you to start with.
So Kabbalah is a Hebrew word, and so you hear I pronounce it differently than it's pronounced in English. Because in Hebrew it's Kabbalah, in English it's Kabbalah. Just the accent is on the different syllable. So the word means, lekabel means to receive. So Kabbalah, which is often translated tradition, actually means that which is received. And as far as I can tell, it represents an ongoing tradition of revelation in Jewish tradition. Incidentally, there's Jewish Kabbalah, there's Christian Kabbalah, and then there's some that's not associated with either. Generally speaking, Jewish Kabbalah starts with a K. It's all transliteration. So it's like the Hebrew letter is not a K, but when it gets transliterated, most of the K transliterations are Jewish. Most of the Q transliterations, you'll see Kabbalah spelled with a Q, are Christian. And you can't tell with a C transliteration what it is. However, in the Library of Congress, the only transliteration they will allow is with a C. So this book, which is Kabbalistic Meditations on the Tree of Life, and I'm going to introduce you or say some things about the Tree of Life tonight. On the cover it's with a K, but in the Library of Congress data it's with a C. So you could take your pick. The earliest specific Kabbalistic work is somewhere between the 2nd and the 4th century, and it's called Sefer Yetzirah. There'll be a slight quiz later, but Sefer Yetzirah means book of formation. Yetzirah is formation. It's attributed, of course, to Abraham, but I talked to Abraham and he didn't write it. We don't know who wrote it. It's a relatively brief book, but it sets the ground for what Kabbalah is and what it became. And the essence of Kabbalah is the heart of Jewish mysticism, but it's not all of Jewish mysticism. There are Jewish mystical traditions which are not Kabbalistic. Kabbalah specifically refers to the 32 paths of wisdom, 10 of which are represented by the model called the Tree of Life. Are you aware of that model? And 22 of the paths of wisdom are represented by the, God bless you, are represented by the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And that becomes the ground of Kabbalah. As far as I'm concerned, all of Kabbalah is still unfolding from that. But what it means, for example, each of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet is seen as a particular way of connecting energy from a realm which is not material to a realm that is material. So there is a dance that each of the letters describes, and it's a dance of energy, so that a word could be read like with the energy of the words rather than reading it with a dictionary or looking for a linear translation. The Torah, incidentally, you know, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, a Jewish tradition called the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible. Tanakh standing for Torah, the first 5 books. The N is for Nevi'im, which means prophets, which includes the historical books and the major prophets and the minor prophets. And then the Ch is Ketuvim, which are the writings, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Songs, some of that literature. I'll remember why I'm saying this.
You were describing the lineage of the Kabbalah and moved on to the 5 books, but I'm not sure where you were going.
Okay, so thank you. So when the Torah was originally written, it was written without spaces between the words. It was written as one word, which was really kind of a remarkable image when you think about it. It gave rise to 5 letters which were given special forms when they come at the end of a word. Those of you who know some Hebrew know that there are 5 letters that if they're at the end of the word, they take a different shape. That came about because they're letters that can just as often start a word as end a word. So to reduce the confusion when it was all written as one word, those special forms were inserted. In typical Jewish fashion, when the words were separated, those forms were kept, even though technically you wouldn't need them. Mystics loved it when the Torah was one word because they could divide it anywhere. You know, it stays fluid. So that, I mean, this notion of literal translation in Jewish tradition is very different, because there are so many ways of reading a text, particularly if you can divide the letters into words wherever you want. When the words were separated, it was not a gratifying thing for those who were mystically inclined, but was even worse for them was when the vowel system was put in. Hebrew is basically a consonantal language. The whole Hebrew alphabet are consonants. So Hebrew is one of those languages that you need to know before you can read. Until we were starting to forget how to read it. So in the early centuries of this era, 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, formalized in the 8th century by a group called the Masoretes, a system of vowel pointing was invented. So that the vowels, which never had existed before, and still don't. If you're in Israel reading a novel or a newspaper, there are no vowels. However, if you're in Israel reading a Tanakh or a prayer book, there are vowels, because it's a different Hebrew, and it's much more difficult to read. So the vowel points were put in. Some of them are dots or forms under the letters. Some of them are dots between letters to indicate how it's to be read. So now you can learn how to read Hebrew without knowing it first. But the mystics were upset about that too, because it intimated that there was only one way to read a word. And that's terribly upsetting if you want to stay fluid, you know, and there are some words definitely that you could read more than one way. So in a sense, particularly to a Kabbalist, the Torah is it's a living work. The metaphor I use is, it's a huge zip file. You know what a zip file is? But it's a zip file that has not been extracted yet. It's just, it keeps extracting and extracting as time goes on, and there's always more in it, which is the image of a spiritual text. A spiritual text is a reflection of the spiritual beings through whom it flowed, and one of the essences of spiritual being is unlimited levels of transcendence. Every time we think we've gotten to the level, we're just stuck again. You know, because there's unlimited levels. It's not like, oh, I've done it.
So here's what strikes me, and I don't know if anybody else can relate to this.
Somebody
but-
told me a very long time ago that if you want to tell people the truth, and sometimes the truth is not to people's liking, make sure you get them also to laugh. Otherwise, they'll kill you.
So first, would you mind closing that door? So the thing that comes to me is growing up as a Jewish lad in New Jersey, somehow I never heard any of that. Somehow there was never any discussion of the mystical, of the meditative, of that which perhaps at that age would have made me want to learn more and want to explore, and yet that was absent. So on one hand, I understand that maybe I would have been disoriented, but at least I might have been drawn in, passionate, enthused. And so can you speak, I'm sure that's not something new that you've heard before, I'm not the first person. But could you address
I've never
that a little
heard
bit?
Look, when I went through rabbinical school, which granted was in the 18th century, but Kabbalah was a footnote in the history books. None of this was part of the curriculum, so much less growing up with it. My own trajectory in terms of interest in spirituality, my training started with Zen Buddhism and Hindu traditions of meditation. And with a Jewish philosopher named Martin Buber, if anybody knows. Martin Buber was the reason I went to rabbinical school. I never went to become a congregational rabbi, but that's a whole other story. I went because I wanted to teach Martin Buber. I discovered Martin Buber was not a favorite person at rabbinical school. Some of the reasons for that included he actually had no personal Jewish practice. He didn't belong to either the Reform, the Conservative, or the Orthodox movements. And he wanted from the very beginning, you know, he came to Israel in the early years of the Nazi regime. He was in favor of a binational state. So he did just about everything to make himself unpopular with the institutionalized Jewish community. Through my, and I won't go into this because it's not the topic of this, but through my experiences with the meditative traditions I was practicing, it became clear to me that if Judaism did not have that level of depth, psychological, spiritual, I needed to be elsewhere. I already found that I didn't fit in a regular congregation, so there was, and the kind of the spirituality that I wanted to be able to talk about, you could talk about more as a psychologist than you could as a rabbi. And it was the same thing with people in the Christian traditions, you know, because mine was the generation of Alan Watts, who went from being an Episcopal priest, then going into psychology and teaching Ram Dass, I mean, it was weird, but you couldn't, there was no pulpit that would hire me to talk about spirituality. They wanted politics, you know, social action, and I'm not opposed to that. It's just, and when I started, I suppose, being available to find it, I found an embarrassment of riches in Jewish tradition, which then became my life work, to teach, to learn, to teach, to study, to write. So along the way, I founded 2 synagogues, one in Los Angeles, because there was nowhere that was focusing on Jewish meditation and Jewish spirituality. And then when we came up to Seattle area, we started another one. I'm not sure that's a positive or a negative. It means I couldn't find another job. Judaism, in fact, has extremely strong teachings in meditation and in spiritual development. They're still not popular. They're still not taught at rabbinical schools. Jewish meditation is not taught at rabbinical schools. Why? Ultimately, it's because any form of true spiritual development is anti-institutionalization. It is a threat to any institution. It's a threat to the authority of those who head institutions, and because of that, it's dangerous. I mean, every other kind of learning, we go to find a teacher, we go to find a book, we go to find a school, we incorporate the knowledge, and then if we want, we can pass it on. Spiritual knowledge, I'm absolutely convinced, is the only kind of knowledge that doesn't happen that way, because we've already got it. It's just a question of creating contexts in which we can remember. Nobody can give another, it would be like somebody giving you a heartbeat or and I'm not talking about a medical procedure, but it's what we already have. So it's like, okay, we have developed ourselves in a culture at a time in history when this part of human being is inhibited. Certainly it was in my growing up, certainly it is still. And it's a question of, okay, so there's going to be some weird people who are going to be interested in it anyways. And in one way or another, we're fringe. I remember in the early days of meditation when my poor parents, God bless them, who said, you know, meditation takes you away from the world. It isolates you. So that rather than talking with people, you're closing your eyes and you're going inside. And they're absolutely right, except that the boundaries are all out here. I can't open my eyes without becoming aware of boundaries and limits, whether they're walls, whether they're bodies, whatever they are. It's inside that lacks those kinds of limits and those kinds of boundaries. So in a strange kind of sense, it's through meditation, and it's through meditative disciplines, and it's through spiritual learning or spiritual remembering, that we become most aware of our incredible connection to each other, to all of life, to the planet, and to the universe. So it's the exact opposite of what the separate self, what the mind tends to perceive. So my experience was very much the same, and there's more available now. In the 1980s, an Orthodox rabbi named Aryeh Kaplan started translating some of the ancient texts. And up until that point, people like me were working with original texts, and while I'm less fluent now than I was then, closer to rabbinical school, but it wasn't something, you can't take a medieval, a 13th century text and just sit down and kind of read it. It takes a different kind of study, so it was a real gift when a lot of that stuff was translated, and then you could take a translation and use the Hebrew along with it and get the nuances and stuff. At least for somebody like me, that was a great help. So it's available. I mean, Aryeh Kaplan wrote a book called Jewish Meditation. It's kind of like a smorgasbord. The best book of his for people who want to look in greater depth at Kabbalistic material is called Meditation in the Kabbalah, with a K.
I remember I was living in Berkeley, and Michael Lerner, there was another congregation in Berkeley at the time. And I'll never forget, because one of them was actually held in an old Baptist church near UC Berkeley, and walking in for the first time, and the live music, and the joy, and the meditation time, it was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my own religion. So, I remember also in college looking at every person in Eastern, all the meditation teachers. Sharon Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Sylvia Boorstein, on and on and on. I was like, wait a minute. Why is like every Jewish scholar seeming to move toward the Eastern meditative religions, etc.? And of course I follow the same tradition. And I just thank you for creating the space so that other people can find that, because I think it's so important, and it felt missing. To not have some sort of meditative focus within a spiritual discourse felt missing.
There are now even 2 different schools that train teachers of Jewish meditation. Sometimes I'm asked, what school did I go to? It is so interesting to watch these things kind of, how it happens. It's like, now I've got my license, now let's see if I can raise the bar so that the next group, it's not as easy. We're very interesting creatures.
Okay, so you're going to teach about the Kabbalah?
I want to teach a little Kabbalah. I want to talk a little bit about the tree. See, the problem with all this, mystics say, there's no way I can communicate. There's no way I can communicate. There's no words that can hold. I can't even call it an experience, because an experience requires the one experiencing it, the experience itself, and that which is experienced. It's a duality. So if you're talking about a unitive moment, a unitive realization, how do you put it in words which by their very nature chop up the world? Every word says this is what fits in that word and the rest doesn't fit in that word. And we take things apart and we describe things. So the mystics say there's no way I could describe it in words, and then the mystics go on to write more than anybody else. And the reason for that is that what they have met, they are convinced, is so crucial. Like if people would just wake up, if we would just wake up, I'm going to just say it as a sentence and whatever it means. If we could wake up to the fact that we are sharing one life, that we are each expressions of one life, whether you want to call it the universe, whether you want to call it presence, whether you want to call it whatever. People call it God. It's unfortunate, but that's another story. Whatever it is, it's not sitting up there somewhere watching us, judging us, ready to reward or condemn us. I don't think so. So, mystics try to find words, mystics try to find images and symbols that somehow will communicate beyond themselves. So I do want to say that what I'm going to be sharing can't be shared. I can't understand it, and neither can you. So if we think we understand, I mean, if you just think about, if we think we understand the mystical vision, we don't